What's up everyone, I'm Twisted. For the longest time now, I've been wanting to make videos on how I would personally adapt some of my favorite champions from League into 2xKO, with Bruiser Minions videos being a huge inspiration. And now that 2xKO is here to stay, I think it's finally time for me to share my ideas. The script for this video in specific has been floating around in my files ever since I came across this video by Spoilers for Everything. You should totally check it out, but basically, instead of just thinking of how champions' abilities could be translated into a fighting game, they go further by thinking of how the champion's identity, their lore, and their reputation could be adapted as well. And this so far seems to be the mindset the actual devs have when developing champions.
What we really care about is kind of the essence of the character, what makes them them. And we don't just mean the lore, we mean when you're playing that character, what does it feel like to play as that character?
Before going over my ideas, I want to establish my goals, which are exactly the ones Spoilers for Everything establishes in their video. First, as I said, I want to get the core of the character right, who they are as a person, what people expect from the character, and loosely adapt the mechanics they have in League. Second, I'm having fun. I'm not a pro player, I'm as casual players come. And to me, something cool or unique is always going to be more appealing than something optimal or good competitively. I'm a big fan of gimmicks and having characters be as distinct as possible from each other, so this is something I'll prioritize in this video. I'll leave the balance for the qualified people. And finally, I want to keep things feasible and under the realm of possibility to some degree. If an idea is too out there, it loses its charm. Alright, so for this video, I wanna try to adapt one of my favorite characters from League into 2xKO. This is Aatrox, the Darkin Blade. Initially, I planned this video to be much shorter, but I got a bit excited. So here are some timestamps in case you wanna skip to a particular part. It's going to take a while until we tackle his gameplay in 2xKO, so if that's what you're interested in, feel free to skip ahead.
We had another name once. Now we are Darkin.
Not much is known of Aatrox's early life, but he was once a noble general of the Ascended Host, a group of mortals turned godlike beings who served the Empire of Shurima. After the trauma of countless wars and the fall of their empire, the Ascended were left without a real purpose, and so they tried to conquer the world, turning even on one another. They used blood magic to alter their bodies, and in time they became known as the Darkin. But Aatrox was still honored and respected amongst his kind, even as they waged war throughout the world. Seeing all of this destruction, the celestial beings of Targon intervened and gave mortals a way to defeat the Darkin and seal their souls inside their weapons. This agonizing prison can only be broken off when a mortal reaches for the weapon. At that point, the Darkin can take over the mortal body and use it as a host. Utilizing blood magic, they can shape their form, and the bodies of those they kill can be used to fill their own, giving them regen abilities and empowering them. However, these forms can still be defeated, sealing the Darkin essence back into their weapon. Aatrox sees his current form as a husk of his former self. He seeks to destroy everything in existence to end his imprisonment, believing that if everything ends, so will his eternal curse. You might have realized that Aatrox's story requires, well, a lot of backstory, and that's intentional. Aatrox is a very complex character filled with trauma and loss. To understand Aatrox, one must also understand the Darkin, for Aatrox is the Darkin. He is the embodiment of their past, their curse, and their fate. He's also the first champion to ever be conceptualized from the ground up as a Darkin, and when his design and story were reworked, the whole backstory of the Darkin was as well. From his lore, I chose these aspects we should keep in mind when adapting him to 2xKO. First, he is a Darkin, which means placing an importance on his weapon and on blood magic. Second, he's a powerful and skilled warrior who seeks the death of everything, being able to take down entire armies by himself. Everything from his animations to his voice should reflect that. Third, despite being a renowned and honored general, Aatrox has no interest in helping mortals, so we should expect him to be far from Rome on the helping my teammate spectrum.
Pray, fool! You face a Darkin.
Now let's look at Aatrox in League of Legends. Here he is a bruiser, and like others from his class, he is mainly played in the top lane. He's best fought from a distance, as most of his damage is dealt once he's up close and personal to his opponent. His abilities focus on closing the gap between Aatrox and his target, and keeping them in the same place, by either knocking them up, pulling them, or even just dashing toward them. Healing by dealing damage is also a core part of his gameplay. With this being said, the key points we can take away from his League counterpart are the following. First, as I just said, he heals a lot but only only by landing his attacks. Secondly, his attacks might be harder to hit, but when they do, it could be devastating for the opponent. And third, he's mostly played in a solo lane, and while his crowd control can be useful, you don't pick Aatrox to be useful to your teammates in the traditional supporting sense. Some of you might have realized that these points loosely align with the ones I established earlier based on his lore. With this, we can conclude that from Aatrox, fans expect a powerful, sword-wielding lifesteal boss who can turn battles on his own if he manages to land his strikes. These strikes, however, are not the fastest, but they are brutal. Therefore, in 2xKO, Aatrox should be a hard-hitting fighter that strives in the mid to close range, having tools that might not be the fastest or safest, but they are very powerful when used correctly.
This cursed form, this crude decaying flesh, I yield it.
Now that we know what his gameplay is all about, let's talk about his visual design and attributes. So far, across all of his appearances, Aatrox's design has been mostly consistent, with only small changes here and there, for example in his headpiece and armor. My personal favorite take is still the original design by David Coe, especially the version from the splash art by Victor Mori. Due to League's perspective and scale, it makes sense for models to be cleaner and smoother. But in 2xKO, the champion's model is at full display, so I hope the team manages to keep his rugged and flashy appearance. From the armor who looks like it was still flowing when it turned solid, to the veins and scales all over his pulsating flesh. As for his height in game, as much as I want him to be bigger than Braum is already pretty big. And the Ascended can change their size anyway, so it's not really a big issue. I don't expect Aatrox to have any extra mobility options like Ahri or Echo, and I also don't expect him to move super fast. Now, finally, let's talk about his moves, shall we?
Come, fight me.
As we've seen with the current cast in 2xKO, champions don't get their full arsenal from League. Not all abilities need to be translated to a fighting game, and those that do, don't need to be super accurate. In fact, they can become something totally unique, such as Blitzcrank's Overdrive in League becoming their steam mechanic in 2xKO. With this being said, what abilities from League are a must for Aatrox to have in 2xKO, and which ones could he be fine without? To me, two of his abilities need to be present. His Q, the Darkin Blade, and his ultimate, the World Ender, which, funny enough, are also the only abilities that were adapted from League to Legends of Runeterra. I'll mention his passive later, but his E is just a dash, which is a universal mechanic in 2xKO. There are fun ways we could implement it, for example, allowing him to dash while using other attacks, just like he does in League, allowing him to cancel certain attacks into a dash, or even completely reworking it into something else like a shoulder bash or something. The possibilities truly are endless. As for his W, well, there's not really an explanation for this ability even existing, aside from gameplay. Aatrox isn't associated with literal chains, and this was also not present in his old kit. Besides maybe the dash, this is probably the last ability you think of when you think of Aatrox. Personally, if this wasn't present in 2xKO, I don't think anyone would care. Not to mention that Aatrox is more the type of guy to just jump at his opponent instead of sending some chains first like Morgana. So Q and Ultimate are a must, but there's actually one other mechanic I think is iconic enough to make it to the game. One that's not even in League anymore, is Revive.
Did you think you could kill me?
Moved from his passive to his ultimate when he was reworked, it gave Aatrox a resource called Blood Well, which filled passively while he was in his ultimate. If he died when the ultimate was still active, he would revive moments later with his health being based on his current Blood Well. Like Akali's Broken Stealth and Irelia's Disarm, this mechanic was removed, never to be seen in his kit again. However, as an old Aatrox main, I still associate this ability with him. Not to mention how in line this ability is with his lore. Darkin are unkillable blood gods who can heal themselves and always come back. The Revive was also translated into Legends of Runeterra, being even more lore accurate there. In LOR, if Aatrox dies, he leaves behind his sword, which can then be equipped by another character. The player can then play a special spell, bringing him back by transforming the character wielding his weapon into Aatrox himself. Just like in the lore, the Darkin can come back as long as their will can overpower a mortal foolish enough to wield their weapon. So yeah, I think Aatrox's Revive is iconic enough that it should make its way into 2xKO. But you might be wondering, how the hell are we gonna make that work? Well, here are a couple ways this could be implemented. In 2xKO, a portion of damage taken by champions is displayed as a grey bar next to their health. When the champion tags out, they'll slowly convert his grey health into actual health. One way we could implement Aatrox's Revive is that the first time he dies while his partner is alive, instead of dying he instead tags out, allowing his health to recover before being able to return to the fight later if his ally survives, giving Aatrox a second chance at the expense of his partner being locked out of assist mechanics for a short while. This would be fine, but it's also just kinda boring in my opinion. There's no player agency here, it all happens automatically. Perhaps to make it more interesting, instead we could give his team access to a special move, only available when Aatrox is down, kinda like the last stand mechanic from earlier versions of the game. When this special is activated, Aatrox recovers some health at the expense of some of his partner's own health. This makes the revive a bit more interesting, as it gives players the choice of bringing a character back at the cost of sacrificing another's health. Another idea that builds on top of this one is giving Aatrox's ally a special Fury Break. Fury Break is a mechanic that becomes active once an ally is knocked out. It essentially works like a stronger break that also temporarily buffs the champion. When Aatrox is defeated, he could leave behind his sword, which is automatically picked up by his partner. Activating this special break would cause Aatrox's partner to be taken over by the blade and transform into Aatrox himself, with his health and resources being that of the champion that transformed, or maybe even less to compensate for having 2 Fury Breaks. To keep it interesting and useful in a 2-player scenario, this would keep the knocking back effect of a normal Fury Break, but give Aatrox the buff instead. This buff doesn't need to be the Fury buff, it could be a new effect themed around Aatrox, like having some kind of lifesteal component, but having his health go down by itself as if his body is decaying, and as such he must keep on fighting to heal himself. But maybe this is getting too complex. Overall, this mechanic gives Aatrox's team an extra break at the cost of forcing a swap and forcing you to sacrifice some health. I also don't think it would be super broken, as Aatrox would need to be the first dead champion in order for it to work. Also, technically this is a defensive/supportive move in some ways, which might go against the key points I established for Aatrox. But this is also a very selfish move. Aatrox literally takes over his partner instead of helping them, and it also fits with his theme of being a raid boss that keeps on fighting, keeps on coming back no matter what. Oh, and side note, since in the normal Fury Break the dead champion appears on screen even after being knocked down, we can justify it working while Aatrox is sealed in his sword by simply having the sword itself as the source of the burst. Mechanically this changes nothing, it's just flavor. So here are the ideas. Number 1, reviving using Ray health at the cost of using assist options. Number 2, a special move where you sacrifice health to bring Aatrox back. Number 3, a special break that sacrifices your whole champion to bring Aatrox back while applying some buff or effect on him. Out of the 3 concepts for his revive, I think the last one is the most unique, but I think the second one provides a more interesting choice to players, since you're not totally sacrificing one character for another. With this being said, let me know down below which of the 3 would you prefer, or if you have a completely different idea on how his revive could be implemented.
I will hack and chop and cleave and sunder the filth of your forms!
Moving over to his Q, in League this ability is divided into 3 sequential blade strikes that are always performed in the same order. All of them have different hitboxes and damage values, and all of them have sweet spots that on top of dealing extra damage also knock up opponents. I think all 3 of these strikes would work fine as normal attacks. They are just sword swings after all, but making them special moves makes more sense since they are that iconic. I'm not sure if they should stay linked to one another with the same input, or if I would rather give players the freedom to use them whenever they want in any order. Yes, using them in order is a direct translation of the League ability and is likely what League players expect, but maybe for a fighting game we shouldn't stick to such limitations and prioritize giving players the choice of which move they want to use. And of course, using the 3 of them in that specific order should still be possible, as a nod to their League counterpart, but it's up to the player if they want to or not. Another idea I got for this Q is tying all of the strikes to the same special move, but in a way very different from the League counterpart. This move would put Aatrox in a stance. Then depending on the next input, Aatrox would perform one of his Qs, light being the first, medium the second and heavy the third. And let's add a dash as well for good measure. This way not only are all Qs tied to the same move, like in League, but it also gives the player the choice of what strike they want to perform. Regardless of how they are implemented, I would emphasize the differences between each strike, with the first swing having the most range and the last one the least, and maybe each having slightly different properties or hitting opponents at a different height. I also think it would make sense for the strikes to launch opponents. Maybe not all of them, but at least one doing so would be a cool nod to how the strikes knock up opponents in League. One aspect from his Q in League that I'm not sure it should be ported over are the sweet spots on the edge of the blade. Deeper mechanics in fighting games are usually reserved for characters that we associate with finesse and precision. It's a mechanic I would expect in someone like Fiora. not Aatrox. Sure, if we really wanted, we could make the tip of his sword deal more damage or even heal Aatrox, but I don't know how much sense that makes in the context of a fighting game. Here healing is always a bit controversial, and as much as I believe it's a core part of Aatrox, I think leaving the heal for his revival or his ultimate makes more sense, unless, and I'll mention this later, some of his attacks cost health. Still, spacing and positioning are a big part of Aatrox's gameplay in League. Landing the sweet spots of his Q is crucial, so if that's an angle the devs want to translate into 2x KO, I wouldn't be against it. They did also keep Darius' tipper mechanic after all. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later.
I am Aatrox! I am the World Ender!
Now let's finally talk about his ultimate, the World Ender. In League, when activated, Aatrox grows in size and wings burst out from his back. He begins flying, changing his animations, though this is just a visual thing and doesn't change his gameplay. World Ender increases his own healing and he gains bonus movement speed and damage. This is a temporary buff that lasts indefinitely as long as Aatrox keeps killing his opponents. In fighting game terms, this is basically an install super. In 2x KO, this could either be a special or a super/ultimate. I think the latter makes more sense, because tying it to a special would require a bit more work to get it right, like having some unique gimmick. There's potential to explore it that way, but I think it makes more sense for it to simply be a super. It's supposed to be a big moment for the champion, something that you only see once or twice in a match. Just like in League, activating this super would cause Aatrox's wings to burst out, changing some of his animations. It's not uncommon for installs to have some invisibility on startup, but for the cool factor I would also go a step further and make the transformation damage enemies around Aatrox. Visually, this would be similar to the special Fury Break that I mentioned. Also, for the old Aatrox fans, this would be a nod to how his ultimate used to damage nearby enemies when activated. Rest in peace, AP Aatrox. This install super would increase his damage and movement speed, like it does in League, as well as the speed of his attacks. It would also make sense for World Ender to alter the properties of some of his moves, and maybe even give him new ones as well. Additionally, Aatrox could put his wings to good use, allowing him to fly and or dash in the air. We don't have a champion yet with this kind of mobility, so why not Aatrox? As I mentioned before, this is where we can implement Aatrox's healing powers. Healing on attacks is probably way too powerful, so granting him some health back if he hits an opponent with the activation of his super might be more balanced. If we really wanted to give him lifesteal, we could make him constantly lose health when World Ender is active, forcing him to hit enemies to get it back. Basically the effect I mentioned when I explained my idea for his revive. But again, I fear that might be a bit too complex. Anyway, World Ender should be a very powerful state for Aatrox that should demand respect from his opponent. Tying these to the special Fury Break I mentioned, maybe when sacrificing an ally to bring Aatrox back, he could come back in his World Ender form. Is that super broken? Probably. Maybe the losing health gimmick would make it less broken? Maybe? Alright, now that we've looked at Aatrox's most iconic abilities, let's look at what else from League we can adapt to 2x KO.
Do you see my edge? Your death awaits!
His passive in League is Deathbringer's Stance, an empowered basic attack that has bonus range, deals bonus damage and heals him. This effect has a cooldown that can be reduced by hitting opponents with other basic attacks or with the sweet spots of his Q. The animation of this attack could be easily translated into a medium or heavy attack, but having it as a special attack could also be interesting. In the animation, Aatrox thrusts his sword forward, impaling opponents. Such a simple move could be adapted in many ways. This could be a chargeable, unblockable attack, referencing how it used to reduce heals and shields in the past. It could simply be an attack with long range, or even with a multi-hitting property. It could be a strike that's followed by an explosion of energy from his blade, or instead, followed by Aatrox swinging his sword while it's still stuck on the opponent, basically working as a command grab. Hell, we could even turn it into a stinger-like move, essentially combining both his E and passive from League. Again, it's a simple move, the possibilities are truly endless, and I mostly just wanted to showcase possible special moves Aatrox could have in 2x KO. Finally, his auto attacks from League could serve as inspiration for his light, medium and heavy attacks. Since World Ender makes Aatrox fly, he even has attacks in League that could be loosely adapted to his aerial attacks in 2x KO. I won't spend too much time on this, they should be exactly what you expect from Aatrox, big sword swings with decent range. I'm probably showing a lot of great examples from other fighting games, just imagine these but with Aatrox. Look at that, wow, they sure know how to swing a sword, huh? Anyways, big strikes, long sweeps, launching you up, or crashing down with his sword. Aatrox's attacks need to feel heavy, brutal, but also graceful in a way. Aatrox is a skilled warrior after all, not a mindless beast. Besides sword swings, I could also see him maybe kicking, but if we really want to spice things up when it comes to his moveset, there are other options besides what we see in League.
Carnage.
And this is where I transition to the next part of the video. Here I'll be discussing moves that Aatrox could have in 2x KO that aren't based on his kit in League. I'll first mention moves we know for sure he can do, and then I'll get a bit more creative. When looking at Aatrox's silhouette, we can see that his sword is a large part of it. This makes sense from a gameplay perspective, because his sword is the source of his power and the source of most of his attacks. And it also makes sense from a lore perspective because, well, Aatrox is the sword. But besides the sword itself, there are other parts that stand out. His bulky gauntlet, his headpiece, and during World Ender, his wings. I think utilizing these elements somewhere in his moves would also make sense, though obviously the sword should still take most of the spotlight. His gauntlet could be used in some of his normals. Simple punches or scratches would work, or even having him punch the ground like he does in the animation of his W in League. The gauntlet could also be used in his throws. I imagine him grabbing his opponents and tossing them like he does to Morgana in the Still Here cinematic. And a grab in the air followed by slamming the opponents on the ground would also be cool to see. Vi also has a move like that in 2x KO. For his headpiece, I don't expect much, maybe a headbutt somewhere, perhaps as a light attack or as part of a throw, and finally his wings. As I mentioned, these only come out during his World Ender install, meaning all of these moves would be exclusive to this state, though the wings could easily pop out for a move and then disappear shortly after. I think that could work too. Or Aatrox could simply have weaker versions of these moves, where he doesn't utilize the wings when he's not in World Ender form. The first idea I have is a simple dive attack, where Aatrox flies diagonally downwards. This was mainly inspired by his old Q, Dark Flight, hence why it's a dive attack specifically, though I could also see similar moves in different directions, like straight forward, straight up, or down, or even diagonally upwards. On screen you're probably seeing a lot of different versions of this idea. This is what I have in mind. Aatrox putting his wings to good use to close the gap between him and his opponent. Another variation of this idea could take inspiration from Soul Bad Guy's Riot Stamp, where he flies backwards before flying toward the opponent. And by combining his gauntlet with his wings, he could have a move where he grabs the opponent and drags them across the ground toward one of the walls of the stage. Very similar to Brom's Winter Ride. And of course, as I mentioned, his wings can give him unique movement options.
I will drown them in oceans of blood.
And now here are some moves that, so far, we don't know if he can do or not. As in, they aren't inspired by his League kit, they aren't based on his weapon or appearance, and they aren't based on something he does in the lore. At least not directly. This is where I want to explore the possibility of Aatrox using blood magic in some of his attacks. This is an area that hasn't been super explored, as mostly we just see the Darkin using their magic to heal themselves and that's it. But we've seen other characters use it more offensively, so I think Aatrox should be able to do it as well. I've mentioned Aatrox having a special Fury Break, and I've mentioned him damaging opponents when entering World Ender. Both of these would visually and thematically be tied to his blood magic. I think having him burst out magic from his body is a cool idea, so if it's not implemented anywhere else, I think it would be cool to at least be a special or super. And if having the energy come out around him is too out there, he could also come out of his sword instead. Maybe the idea could be that there's so much blood magic in him, it's literally bursting out of his body. Other ideas include spewing it forward on the ground, shooting it forward, and honestly, most of what Berserker does in DNF Duel. Oh, and a grab where he chokes his opponent before hitting them with a burst of blood magic would be really cool too. I think expanding how the Darkin use blood magic, even if it's in a very straightforward way like this, is where 2xKO can shine in terms of developing the characters further than League and Legends of Runeterra ever could. I've mentioned at the start how I'm a bit scared of mentioning healing mechanics because they could easily become broken, but having some of Aatrox's attacks heal him while others cost health, for example the ones that use blood magic, would be very interesting to see, creating this strategical playstyle, where Aatrox has to constantly fuel himself with the health of his opponent in order to use his most powerful attacks. I think that's very cool from a lore perspective, but I'm not sure if Aatrox enjoyers are expecting so much complexity and strategy out of the character. Not to say that he's easy to play in League, but he's definitely a really straightforward character, the challenge being in spacing, positioning and hitting your sweet spots, not so much in managing health as a resource, at least not anymore. This heal and self-damage playstyle was more present in the old version of the character.
I am Doom.
And finally, I just wanna say that for supers, I've only mentioned World Ender, because honestly, I don't really have any other great ideas, so please, if you do, let me know down below. I think it would be really cool to incorporate the other Darkin somewhere in his moveset, but making unique models for any of them would probably be too much work and not very sustainable. Instead, maybe Aatrox's moves could be named after his fellow Darkin. I think lore fans would really appreciate that. His chromas could also pay homage to them as well, that would be cool. And speaking of the Darkin, so far, some of the stages seem to be tied to champions, so I wanted to also give my idea for an Aatrox inspired stage. This would be based on the Altar of Blood from Legends of Runeterra. The altar itself would be visible in the background, as well as Zolani's cultists. Zolani herself would of course also be present, and maybe we could include other Darkin either fighting her, fighting for her, or both. And finally, the one thing Riot can't forget when adapting Aatrox to 2x KO, his iconic dance. And that's it. This is how I would personally translate Aatrox from Legends of Runeterra to 2x KO. And oh boy, this video got way too long. So thank you for watching this far. Let me know your ideas for Aatrox in 2x KO down below, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. It's free and you can always change your mind later. I'm Twisted and I'll see you guys in the next video.